Good morning. I had the craziest dream. I dreamed I was a professor at a university. And all the students couldn't come to the class. There was something going on. Well, yeah, there was this big dragon. And this forced everybody to stay home. And did something to the air because everybody had to wear masks. Dreams are strange. It was long. I kept going from one scene to another. But finally I found some keys. The keys were along a beach. And then I opened a door in the wall of the cliffs. And I went through and it was really dark. And then I could see it getting light again. And when I came out, everything was normal again. Or at least it seemed to be. Hey, buddy. How are you? You're a good guy. You come at the right time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. In week 7, the title of the lesson is mind bending. So far, in the last 2 lessons, we've talked about the way in which we have inherited frameworks of cognitive ability and how those have formed patterns in developing cultural responses. So we've looked at physiological adaptations that have influenced how culture develops. And in that way, we begin to understand why our behaviors are repetitive, why our historical periods tend to also seem repetitive or oscillating through cycles. But today, in this lesson, in lesson 7, we're going to look at features of our inheritance, our physiological inheritance, and also our cultural inheritance. So on one hand, we're going to look at dreaming, which is very much begins with physiological mechanisms. And in the reading, the primary reading on dreams, we're going to look at how dreaming may be a adaptation that warns us or helps us develop responses to danger or threats. We're also going to look at another reading on dreams that associates dreaming and memory, and how memories are sometimes reviewed, or how dreams are stored into memories and therefore take on a sort of epicultural value in terms of how we respond to the world around us. The other factor we're going to look at is psychedelics, and that has been the human species' reliance on plants and various pharmaceuticals in order to enhance our visionary perspectives. That is, take those predetermined domains and the mechanisms that work within them and either shatter them for a period of time or enhance them for a period of time. And that gives human beings a very different perspective other than what they have been predetermined through evolution to have acquired. The reading on that really tells us or suggests that this has driven certain cultural developments ultra vires the way in which we would have normally developed without the use of psychedelics or without spiritual experience. And we're going to take a kind of a deep look at that. So, in order to do that, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to build a fire this evening, and we'll talk about it more and about the readings a little bit more around the fire. Our distant hominid ancestors began to use fire about 400,000 years ago. That's a long time. That's before the modern human beings emerged from the various strands of hominid life. They used it, and the significant thing about fire is the way that it's used and how it's used by modern cultures really begins to originate with modern human beings, us people who began to develop culture and became human beings around 200,000 years ago. This was a great advance because fire allowed us to gather around a hearth. Fire allowed us to share with one another, look across the fire at one another, to warm ourselves, but also use fire to keep ourselves safe because animals wouldn't come close to a fire that was burning. Fire allowed us to avoid sleep because we could sit up around a fire. It may have been the source of first music. It may have been the source of first education. Fire is an amazing quality that humans have adopted and adapted to cultural uses. We're lucky that way. The fire may have been the place where first stories were told. And it's also said that dreams may have been the first stories, that when people awaken, in fact, many indigenous people around the world use, this is getting hot, yeah, many indigenous people around the world use dreams as stories. When they have a dream, they tend to remember it. They tend to also master the act of lucid dreams, where they're awake in their dreams, so to speak, and to somewhat, in some ways, take agency within the dreams. And this creates the storyline in which they can relate to others. Now, medicine people or wise people, elders, could interpret these dreams to help them understand what may be happening in the future, or what might be the probabilities of their fortune. But generally, the stories were based on basically 7 themes. Most psychologists and writers and storytellers can say that there really are only 7 stories. And those 7 stories can be combined with one another. The seven stories tell us about our human failings. They tell us about human comedy. They tell us about how we can rise up and how we can also fall. And among these stories, you can recognize many of them. For instance, Icarus is a story of a rise to freedom and a fall to one's demise. Oedipus, again, a story of a fall and then a rise and then another fall. And so these are the story themes that go with human storytelling, but they're also related to the stories in dreams. And these stories are innate. They're stories that we know when we hear them. Oh, yes, I understood in the middle of that story how it was going to end. We understand them because they're innate to us, just like the visions in dreams. What happens in dreams is the latent power of dreaming, the latent cerebral activity initiates the dream, and then it borrows from our real life. It borrows from what we perceive around us and the experiences that we've had, and then it takes those and it melds them into universal stories, or stories that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years and maybe even longer than that. In fact, almost all mammals seem to dream. We can record, scientists can record REM sleep in every mammal. And that's because our cerebral mechanisms are very, very similar. And so this process, this innate process of dreaming, is something that has been developed over long, long periods of time. Why? Because it's useful. In the article that you're reading this week, the contention is that dreams are a way of helping us prepare for risk aversion. So things that are dangerous, things that are threatening. Our dreams help us learn ways in which to avoid them, to run away, to confront, to hide. And so, in fact, what it says in the article is that about over 50% of dreams have to do with risk aversion, because it was so important, and they state this, that it was so important in the Pleistocene period. I tend to think we can go back beyond the Pleistocene period because risk has always been a factor. There's some contention that I have that risk has always been a decreasing factor in human lives. Well, I really sort of question that, because even though Pleistocene life might have been tough and with less physical protections, I think the fact that people were very knowledgeable about their surroundings and also lived in more isolated areas, and there were customs in terms of aversion of others, life might have been actually better than it is, say, in Gaza or in Syria or in Indonesia or any other place of conflict today, or lived oppression like in Alabama or Mississippi or Chicago. So who knows? But I'm not going to argue that one now. That's one of my criticisms of the article, that it focuses just on the Pleistocene. But the article is good because it does explore the innateness of our dream mechanism and how it takes current information and uses it in a historical way, to a deep historical way, to help us cope with stress, to cope with danger, to laugh off serious problems and even to deal with serious problems. Dreams often help us deal with grief because if we're grieving someone who has died, that person may come to us in dreams and comfort us and let us know that things are going to be okay, that a life lived was every bit worth the fact that it's no longer there. And and those are the kind of images that deep dreaming gives us. So that also affects how we construct culture around us because that mechanism and how it constructs images and stories also helps us create the story of culture that we choose and we move toward in our waking lives. The other article, one of the other articles, the one on psychedelics, is also interesting because what it suggests is, like dreams, there we have a innate psychic interest in associating ourselves with particular plants and pharmaceuticals, and that gives us extrasensory uh, perception or extrasensory um, visions that also challenge some of that innate structure, but also put barriers up to the kind of things that stop us from being creative, stop us from innovating and thinking beyond the scope of our culture and our environmental surroundings. So things like innate ability of mathematics, innate abilities of uh, time and space, innate abilities to see alternatives to these things and alternatives to the way that we uh, perceive philosophical issues. And so the use of psilocybin, the use of peyote, the use of LSD, the use of ayahuasca, even plants like cannabis, marijuana, uh, are plants that human beings have used for ages and ages in order to create situations that are also much like the spiritual rituals that don't include those. In fact, one of the conclusions of studies on psychedelics is that psychedelics mimic or they are like the kind of experiences, the out of body experiences that we have when we practice a spiritual ritual, or we go on a fast, or we go on a really long pilgrimage that requires a lot of physical sacrifice and physical exertion. Um, and almost every culture uses either both or psychedelics or spiritual um, sacraments of some sort. And that is because it's a way of awakening the latent structures or the latent mechanisms in our brains that help us move past our present understanding of the universe and see it from a much more holistic fashion. Uh, I'm not advocating that you go out and try psychedelic drugs. That's not what this lesson is all about. This lesson is basically to help us understand that beyond our immediate perception of the world around us, there are mechanisms that lay latent, that have been laid down hundreds, thousands of years ago within the development of hominids and the early human beings that allow us to continue to develop and in a trajectory. They're latent now, but they may not always be latent. There may be either environmental, biological, or cultural ways that draw them out of latency into more predominant use and expression. It's interesting, though, that among the hominids that exist today, humans are the most susceptible to most psychedelics. It's almost as though the psychedelic compounds have chosen us as a receptacle for their work. That way, we may be agents in their propagation and in their need to reproduce the same sort of struggles that we have. So, the other reading is also interesting on dreams. It links memory and dreams are certainly remembered events. Old people like myself, we can remember dreams that happened to us when we were children. We can remember the images, the sounds, uh, the frightening occurrences or the funny occurrences. I can remember the dream when I first flew. What a great dream. I can remember a dream where I fell off a cliff and fell and fell, and I was so afraid, but all of a sudden I landed in a soft bed of moss. And it was like a landing in a feather bed. And I thought, what a great relief. I was so stressed. But there was something natural that was able to catch me and relieve that stress. Um, so, dreams have a lot to do with memory. Um, the mechanism is tied to our memories in a very strong way. One, it remembers very normal things that we see, but it also remembers things that are passed on to us genetically. The fear of snakes and spiders with some people, the fear of heights, the fear of drowning. All of these things are embedded, even though we may not have even experienced or come close to experiencing them, are still embedded within our dream life. And that's almost a genetic memory that follows all human beings. These are qualities of indigeneity that indigenous people have used to give them guidance in their cultures, to give them guidance in their personal and moral lives, and to expand their knowledge of the world around them in terms of different ways, different doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley once said, that they could open up and look through to see the world around them. Among the Anishinaabe people, there's a part of creation story begins this way. It's it's often told with a shaker. Um, when this world began, it began by way of a vision of Kijamanado, the creator. When Kijamanado first had this vision, Kijamanado saw that there was too much water and too much ice. Being unsatisfied, Kijamanado went to work on the vision again. And after working long and hard, Kijamanado came to the vision and looked upon it and saw once again that there was too much water and too much ice. Being unsatisfied, Kijamanado went to work on the vision again. And after working long and hard, Kijamanado came to the vision. This time Kijamanado began to walk upon the vision. It was dry and flat. Being dry and flat, Kijamanado walked a distance until Kijamanado saw in the distance what Kijamanado perceived was a hill. But when Kijamanado came close, saw that it was just a little cloud. Being unsatisfied, Kijamanado went back to the vision. Working long and hard on that vision, Kijamanado once again returned to the vision. And this time Kijamanado began to walk around the outside of the vision. As Kijamanado walked around the outside of the vision, Kijamanado came to a river. Kijamanado crossed the river. Kijamanado then came to a hill, and seeing that it was a very high hill, Kijamanado began to walk into the center of the vision. where Kijamanadu saw a pine tree and an oak tree. Kijamanadu saw a bear and an otter. And from there, everywhere that Kijamanadu looked, Kijamanadu could see that this world that we live in today was coming into vision. Vision. We tell that story with the shaker because it said that before all there was, before anything was, the only thing was the sounds of the shaker. So think about that for a moment. That before everything, there was only sound. And from that, Kijamanadu began to construct a vision. If that was the material that was available. People used to say that there was a sound that came from the stars at night. Almost a singing of many, many voices at night. And in the daytime, one strong voice could be heard if you listened close enough for it. I don't know about that. I sometimes wonder if these are just stories, whether they're parables of some sort. But I do know that those stories are innate, because the first time we hear them, it is like we've heard them many times before. Even though it's the first time we may have heard them, it's like we knew them already. Sound, vision, process, development over time, evolution of things. In our lodge, we tell a story that helps people deal with grief. If you bear with me, I'll tell you that story. The story goes this way. I need you to watch the fire and listen to my voice. Not too far away from here, there's a place where we can go and sit. And it's a place where the sun rises and the sun sets. It's placed along a river. And if you'll walk with me for a little while, you can let the flames take you there. Let the sound of the crackling fire take you there. You can let the little bit of breeze that we hear around us take you there. We'll walk out this way toward the north. As we walk toward the north, we're going to cross over a small creek. That creek runs down to the river, but we can't follow that way because it goes and gets marshy and hard to walk. So we're going to walk down the hill on the other side. It's rather steep, but we'll do okay. We'll walk down there, and as we get down there, there's a bunch of birch, and tonight you can see them in the moonlight. There's a good moon shining tonight. Just came up a little while ago. As well, Mars is over there too. It's looking down on us, and further west is Jupiter. It's a beautiful night. Now, as we get down to those birches, we're close to a little lake where the river flows in. That lake is in our land. It's where we go to get water, to fish. But that's not where we're going. We have to find the river that flows into that lake. That lake is full of life. It's the river, though, that we're looking for. We're going to go again to the north. We're going to cross over a little bit of a wet area. And then we're going to climb up some rocks. So be careful climbing up those rocks. Be really careful. Don't want you to slip and hurt yourself. Climb up those rocks. They're broken, shattered from the glaciers that once went through here. And you're going to climb up to the top. And there's a pine forest there. Big pines. Big pines that have grown for a long time. Pines were once cut in this country, but they've been allowed to grow because they don't need them anymore. They grow up into big trees and create a huge canopy, and so dense right now in the place where you're at that you can't even look up and see the stars because overhead there's so many pine boughs. But we're going to walk now as we climb up this embankment and over into the pine forest. We're going to work our way through the pine forest. There's a little bit of light so we can pick our way through. And as we pick our way through, it takes a while, but now you should be able to see the light of the moon through the pine trunks as we get close to the western edge of the pine forest. If it was daytime, you could see what was left of the fall flowers, the asters, purple asters, a few white asters. You can see the yellow goldenrod. All of these plants were used by our ancestors. You can see the grasses and the colored leaves that float on top of the grass. As we get closer to the edge of the opening, you can look down and see the river that flows past. I want you to go down, just down the bank a little ways where you can see the river clearly, where the light from the moon and the stars and the planets are soaked up, and it lights up both sides of the river. It's a wide river, quite a ways across. On the other side, there's another forest. That's an oak forest, and it stretches up to the top of the hill beyond. I want you to look across there. There's a few cedars growing along the edge of the river, but the rest of the hillside are oak trees, and the oak trees have lost their leaves now. They're standing bare, and you can see the ground. Find a place to sit down. Look around, there's some rocks. There's some soft grass to sit on. Just sit down, just for a moment, and look across the river. As you look across the river, coming down through the hill of oaks, you'll see someone. Just one person. First, it's hard to see who they are. In fact, by the time they get to the bottom and behind those cedars, you don't know who they are yet. You don't see how it happens? It's almost as though time stopped for a moment and then started up again. But now they're walking up the bank towards you, and now you recognize who they are. They've come to talk to you. Now they're standing in front of you, waiting for you to motion for them to sit down. Motion for them to sit down, and then when they do, take your hand, reach out, and put it in their hand. Let yourself speak the truth. Listen to their knowledge. Don't hide your face. Watch the smile cross their face. And when the few words of your conversation are finished, because there really isn't a long conversation here. What can be said to one another is so full of meaning that only a few words suffice. Let them lift you up, holding your hand, and then take your hand out of theirs, put it on their shoulder, and as they turn around and begin to walk down to the river again, just let your hand rest. Let it rest next to your other hand. Hold it close to your heart. See them walk down to the river, and as though time stands still again, they're gone. You can look on the other side, and you can see them come up out of the cedars and begin to walk up that oak hill. You can watch them as they ascend the hill to the crest. They don't look back when they reach the top. They just go over. Now you've seen the river. Turn around. Come back. Come back up the small hill into the pine forest. Dark here, but there's nothing to be afraid of. You can glimpse your way through from trunk to trunk until you reach the hard stones that are crumbled by ages of glaciers. Work your way down and be careful. Don't fall. Don't get your feet stuck. Don't bruise your hands. Be careful. Cross that wet spot. Walk to where the birches are. Their bark is shining in the moonlight and in the starlight and in the light from planets. And now come up the hill and sit with me by the fire. I hope you enjoy the readings this week. There's a lot there, a lot to learn, a lot to process. Take the 2 weeks and do it, and talk to one another on the discussion forums about your feelings and your thoughts. Such a very important part of how our cultures are constructed and how those innate gifts of creation are within us, and how they were discovered by the indigenous peoples of this world and turned into cultures that were beautiful, artistic, creative, intelligent, and self-aware.